Ready? All right, guys, looks like we're ready to get started. My name is Luciana Padua. You can call me Lou. I work with Hydra 1303, and we're here today to basically talk how about microservices are really bridging development and infrastructure teams. So on the agenda for today, what I have for you guys is basically the difference in the approach of the architecture with application, talk a little bit about the new architecture and how it is different from the traditional. Take a look on what are some of the major requirements for our development team. Take a look on what are some of the complexities involved with the traditional data center and what we have today. And then show to you what infrastructure teams are finding as far as challenges to actually be able to help developers, and how we can provision an infrastructure that will support microservices. And then I'll get to basically showing to you the advantages of microservices as far as the developers and the infrastructure team is concerned. So folks, when we take a look on traditional versus cutting edge architecture, if you start looking at what we consider the traditional, you basically have one instance with multiple services. We've been using that for several years as far as the architecture for applications. And when you look at this type of design, you might have one database or multiple databases with some kind of clustering system. But when you look at this design, all of the services are embedded in one instance. All of the code is embedded in that instance, and the code talk to each other within that instance. When you look at a cutting edge, or basically what we're calling now, the microservices architecture, what is happening there is we are actually splitting the code into multiple instances. So multiple services, multiple instances, multiple databases. When you look at this architecture, we're going to require an API gateway, and then you have your web clients, your mobile clients, and so on, accessing the different services. So coming from the infrastructure side of the house, to me, this was the hardest part to get my head around, to understand, what does microservice really means to us, and how is that going to impact my infrastructure, my security, and how I'm going to design the infrastructure and the security to actually be able to support microservices. Well, development team comes to us, and they want to basically leverage this new cutting edge infrastructure, this new cutting edge way to develop the applications. So how can I build my infrastructure to support them? So the first step was to understand what's the difference between traditional versus cutting edge. Then the next thing that we start looking at is how developers want to consume that infrastructure. What do they need and what do they want today? So if you think about, again, coming from the infrastructure side, our understanding, I see, my colleagues that are developers, they want a sandbox. They want basically to be able to develop when they need. They want it ready to go when they need. And also some kind of self-service portal that they can use. You might see that today we are repacking and refactoring applications. What does that really mean on the end of the day? When you look at repacking an application, I'm just taking the application with a traditional design and bringing that application with traditional design into a container-based environment. And that's just porting the application over, and that's the repackaging part. And you might have developers now with microservices which are really refactoring applications. So changing how the services and the code on the application works. And basically the way we see it from the infrastructure side is you're just splitting that across multiple instances in multiple containers possibly there that we have to deal with. So as far as the development team today, what we're trying to help them with is basically how they can have access to their sandbox so they can actually play, develop what they need when they need. How can they help us and the business and the enterprise get applications that exist today that might be legacy applications, but bring them to a modern infrastructure with containers and leverage that. And then the ultimate goal is really the refactoring, so we can gain several benefits from that as well. But this is what we are seeing with our development teams today. And as far as the requirements, in order to be able to support the application refactoring, support microservices, be able to even repackage an application, what do they need? Well, the network and the infrastructure really has to be programmable, right? I need to have flexibility in that infrastructure. I need to be able to basically allow now these services to talk to each other. Before, the services were within the application, the codes were all together. I didn't have to think about that they need to communicate because they run together. Now they're split apart in different instances. Well, obviously, they need to communicate. So how do we do that? We need some kind of programmable network, and that programmability is something that, you know, makes everything more flexible as far as the development side goes. So we have to be concerned with that and how we're going to provision that and tie the services together. Another thing is they need to be able to prototype, right? Basically run the code, put updates, put patches, do different things to the apps that they're doing. Sometimes they might be doing customization, right? I see that with some of our customers on healthcare. They might have, for example, an Epic module that they use, and they get the standard from Epic, and then they want to customize that module. In order to customize, developers have to come in, you know, change some of the code, customize. If it takes it too long for them to deliver, it's, you know, it might be days, it might be a month that my nurse cannot use that particular model that we just got from Epic. So that needs to be customized. I need to be able to basically reduce the time that it takes to get that in place, and also reduce the cost that it will take. You know, obviously time is money, and at that point, if my nurses are not being able to use a particular application because, you know, developers got stuck because we didn't have the proper infrastructure for them to get the code out there fast enough, that basically delaying a project. So when we take a look at the traditional data center, guys, what do we have? One of the biggest challenges that we see coming from the infrastructure, developers are coming to us, and obviously they need infrastructure to be able to do all of their work. And the thing that most of the time happens is you got to put in a request as a developer. You say, okay, I need infrastructure so I can test, develop, and build my code. And when we get to basically the virtual infrastructure team or infrastructure team, I have to put in the requirement, I have to get approvals, I have to have it tested, I got to build the virtual machines, I have to set the network for it, I got to configure security policies for all that. Maybe I put you on a little test and dev bubble, but then the test and dev bubble is not like my production, and obviously, you know, that could be another issue, because when I take the production, it's different. So finally, I give them the infrastructure they need to dev, and at that point, 7 days later, you know, they realize they need more infrastructure, or they have different needs that we didn't give enough for them. Another thing that happens is sometimes they ask for a lot more than what they need, because they know, hey, if I need to take, you know, and 7 days is an average, right, guys? It could be your company could be provisioning that infrastructure within a few days. If you're friends with the network team, the infrastructure team, the security team, or it could be that, you know, it takes 2 weeks to get that provision. So then developers are going to hold on to that infrastructure. Say you gave them 20 VMs or 30 VMs. It's resources that are being consumed out of the infrastructure that they're not giving it back to you, because they're thinking, well, if it takes me that long to get what I need, I might as well hold on to this even though I'm not using, because, you know, I don't want to go through all this trouble again. So these are a lot of challenges that we see, that the traditional data center and the complexity that is involved with that don't support the microservices architecture and the speed in which I need to deliver and develop applications today. So with those challenges, what do we see? I think the number one, you start looking at this, is how do I get the infrastructure ready just in time? So when they need it, they can have it. How can I give them some kind of a portal or something that they can go in and actually request that infrastructure? How can I scale, right? That's a major thing, because there is all solutions out there, but scalability is always an issue. Patching. How do I provide security? Now I'm talking about microservices, so I'm going to need load balancers, right? If you start thinking again, services are split across multiple instances, I'm going to need load balancers for that. Well, how do I provision that? And then security, right? Security is a huge one. Security is a whole nother ball game, and we'll talk a little bit about today. But if you think about that, I have to go over major challenges to actually be able to provision what they want. And obviously, on the end of the day, guys, even if I provision everything, I still need to monitor the environment. I still need to get analytics from that environment. So those are, I guess, mega challenges that we see in the infrastructure side and that we're trying to overcome to support our development teams. In order to overcome those challenges, what are some of the major things that we're trying to do? So we have to think about something that gives us on-demand provisioning and scaling. We need to think about visibility. We need to think about monitoring. We need to think about how we are going to provision security, right? And obviously, on the end of the day, integration with cloud provider. So if you start thinking about everything that we saw this morning, you think about the vision with VMware, you think about any cloud, any workload, anywhere, how do we get there? Right? Most customers are still sitting there on a hierarchical design for their infrastructure and for their data center. They have a lot of applications still being developed or having the monolithic architecture. So how do we build the infrastructure so we can support the DevOps teams and basically allow them to actually move forward and get to basically what they need? Couple of things. As far as provisioning and scaling, what do we consider? With provisioning and scaling, I need to figure it out how I'm going to handle my Kubernetes clusters, right? How I'm going to deploy them, how I'm going to accelerate that deployment. I got to figure it out how I'm going to eliminate some of the manual steps that are involved with Kubernetes, and also how to minimize some of the mistakes, obviously scalability and optimize the resource utilization. Like I said, we want to get to a point that my developer doesn't feel like I have to hold on to all these resources because it takes me 7 days to get anything back. So we want to be able to provision the resources they need, and when they're not being utilized, here, right? So optimize the actual resource and infrastructure. When we talk about visibility and monitoring, right? So a couple of things that we have to consider. Obviously, we want to be able to troubleshoot all of the operations, have visibility within the operations. When we look at basically my development team, they will need some kind of application, performance monitoring and managing, and also they need to have real-time visibility, within the operations and within the containerized environment. So how we are going to actually accomplish that? So major challenges that we have, security is a huge one. Guys, we need to be able to provide a way to have that container registry secure. We need to be able to have policies for microservices, right? So I mentioned security is huge. I'm talking a little bit about security today. We have another session on Wednesday that is just about security for microservices with NSXT. So we'll get into more details. But when you think about security, now I have actually much better visibility, because before services and code were all embedded in one instance. Now I actually have visibility of the services within the multiple instances. I can apply security policies there that are actually more granular than what we had before. and a lot more visibility. So those are major considerations for us. And obviously we want to be able to, minimize any kind of application breach. Nobody wants to end up like Tesla, being hacked and crypto mined because they left a Kubernetes dashboard open. I mean, that's just not, what we want. So obviously those are all the things that the infrastructure team now is thinking about and thinking how we're going to provision that. So when you think about all of that and the fact that now, all of my CX level, my management is going to be telling me, hey, we got to be cloud ready. We got to have some kind of, cloud design involved in this. How do we get there, right? I think that most of us are in the same boat where, you hear all of the super cool things that can be done, but you look at the infrastructure side of the house and you go, how do we achieve this? So obviously, these challenges today, we can actually take care of them. And if you start looking at the infrastructure that will be able to support microservices, you're basically looking at PKS, right? So when we start looking at PKS, there's several components there. But for our talk today, I'm just going to basically point out a few things. As we mentioned, microservices is an application architecture. It allows me to split my services across multiple instances, and I can leverage networking that's built in with basically NSXT. NSXT comes built in with PKS, and that gives you the networking piece. So actually, a lot of the plumbing under the hood is built for you, and you probably saw earlier this morning they had some demos, live demos. Created a namespace, and then there you go. You get your logical switches, logical routing. So a lot of that work was taken out of the hands of the admin. I don't have to sit there and deploy a logical switch and then make a connection like I used to do with workloads on VMs. This is much easier as far as dynamic provisioning, and because I have that dynamic provisioning, I get all of my scalability as well included with that. Also, guys, another thing that's pretty huge about this design is going to be the microservices with the actual microsegmentation. So if you look at this, now my container interface is a point where I can actually apply policies. I can have security groups, security policies, and that is going to be applied on a per service level base, on a per application level base, on a per container base. I can actually get very granular with this. And if you think about, this is what we were looking for, right? How do I accomplish one request that we had, which was from our development team, hey, just let me use Kubernetes, let me do what I can do at, other service providers out there. Let me just do what I can do out there in-house. Well, the deal is, if they are using anything outside of your control that is not on the enterprise, can you really, account for the security? Can you, make sure that things are being provisioned right? Like I said, the Tesla is a perfect example. What started happening on the enterprise, guys, is we end up with what we call a shadow IT, because the infrastructure team could not give the developers what they needed fast enough. They turned their back on us and then said, okay, you know what, I'll just go to GCP. I'll just go to Amazon. I'll get Kubernetes somewhere else. I'll do my thing over there. And then we have no control of what's happening. You look at this infrastructure, and now we're telling them, you can have what you want, but it is under our control in-house. And of course, we do have integration with cloud, and obviously there are several solutions there that we can implement with this, but the core base of the infrastructure is handled by us. And I think that with that, basically, you get several benefits, right? So how does the microservices bridges the infrastructure and the DevOps teams together? I think that if you think about the new architecture of application, will allow you to have several benefits. Because of this microservices architecture, they're actually doing us a favor. If you think about the infrastructure team, all of our lives, what did we do? We segmented everything. Why? Because we wanted to have segmentation and control. Now, they are giving us segmented instances. That's all I care. So I can apply policies and do the segmentation that basically will allow us to provision all the security, and it doesn't matter if it's on-prem, in-house, or in cloud. As an infrastructure team, a security team, I can actually work with my development team, and basically they helped us by creating this new architecture, making it easier for us to see the segmentation and make it more granular. So that's basically what I have for you guys. I have a few more minutes. I just want to do a whiteboard real quick. I want to show you the architecture of PKS on a actual, like a big picture view. And that way, that for folks that are new, you can kind of get your head around, because there's so many moving pieces when you talk PKS and people are looking at it going, okay, what is happening here? So let me just show you guys. I also have a blog that you can take a look that has a lot more details than I can cover in 30 minutes here. And on Wednesday, 10 a.m. here with you guys as well. And then we're going to talk just about microsegmentation for microservices, okay? And I'm just going to show you something that might be helpful here. If you're thinking about PKS, right? PKS is a framework, is an architecture that we're going to use with a self-driven data center. So if you think about the foundation, you have your underlay, and that's going to be your network infrastructure. So that's basically your switching, routing, your physical infrastructure. On top of that, you're going to have your vSphere, and then vSAN. And basically, that gives you the base. With that, you have your networking and security. And guys, this is NSXT, provisioning your network and security. Then, to maintain the life cycle, orchestrate updates, and so on, you have BOSH. And BOSH, you get your K8s, you have your pods. And this gives you a big overview of the architecture. You also have service broker. And this is your self-driven data center. To monitor all of these, what do we actually have? There's a couple of things here. You probably heard of VRNI, the vRealize Network Insight. You probably heard VRA for automation. You probably have seen Wavefront, Log Insight, and VROps. And guys, Wavefront also now has Log Intelligence, right? So actually that was just yesterday, right? So you see the Log Intelligence with Wavefront to monitor all of these. And I think that with that you get a big picture of what is coming down the road for us, right? And on the infrastructure side, really, we're just leveraging what we had before, infrastructure with networking, with segmentation. For the developers, you know, I don't care what they are running inside their Kubernetes clusters. It doesn't matter to me on the infrastructure side. I'm provisioning what they request. But the security and control of all of these is actually basically within my enterprise. So then policy and control is very granular. You talk about security, again, this can be very granular. And I think this gives you at least an overview of you know, a major idea, because again, when you talk about PKS, there's so many moving components and trying to understand what is doing what and how that works makes it a little bit easier, I think. So I hope this was helpful, and if you guys have any questions, we're here. Come talk to us. I am available for beers. No, just kidding. I don't drink. But come talk to us and let us know if we can help. Thank you. Absolutely. Hi.
I hear a lot about microservices, microsegmentation, Kubernetes. I understand the value of that as it pertains to the applications, more rapid development,